Good afternoon, folks, and welcome to today's session, FEDSAS Online 51. Today we are going to talk about the Protection of Public Information Act, or POPIA as it's known, and we have Jeanne van der Merwe, our manager for our FEDSAS Legal Services, who's going to be bringing us the information across to you as an audience. Hopefully you enjoy the session. If there are any questions, please feel free to ask, or please feel free to get hold of us later on during the time. With that, I'm going to hand over straight away to Jeanne so she can take us through the process. Good afternoon, Jeanne. How are you today in Bloemfontein?
There you go. Thanks, Paul. That I said a webinar never goes by that I forget to unmute. So thanks from your side as well, and good afternoon to everyone. And yeah, it's great to be tuning in again. A whole new topic that we're starting to look at, the POPIA Act, or POPIA as it is sometimes referred to, the Protection of Personal Information Act. Now, there's actually so much information and so much prescripts in the POPIA. Today, I've decided to just focus on the compliance planning. So I'm going to point out to you throughout the presentation what we will be looking at and what we will be considering in our upcoming webinars. So for today's just an introductory session, and then I'd like to get a bit practical to see how do we plan and how do we go about to plan to ensure that we comply with the POPIA Act. Now, seeing that we are in the midst of this COVID-19 crisis, the pawpaw has now also hit the fan, or also, as I've put it, the POPIA has now also hit the fan. So there's now some additional requirements and prescripts that we have to start looking at to ensure that we eventually establish a practice of responsible information governance, and where we get to a point where we can easily and comfortably ensure that we can now protect the personal information of our learners, of our educators, of our parents responsibly. I've decided to start this session just referring to what the status of the POPIA Act is. And I want to share an overview with you from where we came from up until where we are now. It's important, before we know where we're heading, we have to just understand where the POPIA Act came from, to understand what the different role players are, and why we have the requirements that we have as is described or required by the Act. So first of all, on the 19th of November 2013, the POPIA Act gets the go-ahead of Parliament. So the whole Act was drafted. And then on the 11th of April 2014, only certain parts of POPIA become effective. Those parts that did come into effect in 2014 was mostly the parts which gave the power to the information regulator to draft specific regulations. And that indeed did happen. In 2017, the draft regulations saw the light. And then finally, on 14 December 2018, the final regulations was published. So just to give you an overview of what the regulations require now, I'm not going to go into detail of the regulations today, but I think it's just important to understand in a nutshell what the information regulator is about and what the regulations is about. The regulations mostly consist of different forms, and those forms would assist in future if you have parents or data subjects who might want to object to the processing of their personal information, or if they want to lay a complaint with the information regulator, or if they want to request a correction of the information which is held by the school. So these regulations mostly prescribe the forms that we want to use. And if we look at the role of the information regulator, if you want to lay a complaint, you'd look at those regulations to go to the information regulator, who's also responsible to see to it that entities now abide by the POPIA Act. So that's just to give you a view of where we came from. And where we are now is that the most parts of the POPIA Act has now become effective. I must say I was actually quite surprised when we saw that the dates of and the act which is now effective was announced. I didn't think that we would see POPIA Act becoming into or being declared effective in this year, specifically seeing as we are dealing with the chaos that COVID has caused. But yeah, here we are, and schools now have 12 months to comply with the POPIA Act. So from FEDSAS' side, we want to try and assist you as far as possible to see to it that you do comply with the POPIA Act, and we would like to point out how to go about, where to start planning, and to eventually be sure that you do comply with the Act. So first of all, I want to start off and kick off with just sharing some academic information, if I can put it like that, which I take directly from the POPIA Act. So it's important to first of all understand specific definitions of the POPIA Act before we can start looking at the planning of the implementation of the prescripts of the POPIA Act. So first of all, just to understand what the purpose of the Act is, first of all, it is to give effect to the constitutional right to privacy, an individual's right to privacy, the school as a juristic person's right to privacy. And it's actually, if you listen to the name of the Act, the Protection of Personal Information Act, it actually speaks directly to the constitutional right to privacy. We want to give effect to that right to privacy by protecting personal information. Now, the second thing, the second purpose that we must take note of is we want to balance the right to privacy against the right to access of information. Now, we do have, on the other hand, the POPIA Act. Now, that's the Promotion of Access to Information Act versus the POPIA Act. So we now have two acts which are actually trying to balance this rights of the protection of personal information versus a person's right to access of information. That's the two acts that we must keep in mind. I'm not going to focus on the POPIA Act today, just on the POPIA Act, on the protection of personal information, but I do want you to keep in mind that there's also a right to access to information that we must not lose sight of. So if I have to sum up the purpose of the POPIA Act in one sentence, I'd say the purpose is the safeguarding of personal information when it is being processed by a responsible party. Now, the words highlighted in red, we have specific definitions for in the POPIA Act itself. So I am going to share with you the definitions of what is personal information. With regards to who is a responsible party, I can directly indicate to you that schools would be considered responsible parties. It's private bodies or public bodies, and schools as a public body being governed by the SGB would definitely be responsible parties, and therefore do have an obligation to safeguard personal information which is processed by the school. And then just to indicate to you how the POPIA Act is put together, the POPIA Act prescribes 8 conditions, and those 8 conditions regulates the manner in which personal information may be lawfully processed. But I don't want to bore you with an academic lecture on these 8 conditions and so on. I'd rather take a practical look at and implement those conditions in a practical way. But throughout the session, I will point out to you where we are working with which conditions. So first of all, just to answer the question, what is personal information? Now, very importantly, you can't protect what you can't spot. So it's very important to first just kick off with the question of what is personal information. Now, basically, it's all of your identifiers. Now, what do I mean with an identifier? It's any information which can identify a specific person or a juristic person or a legal entity. To give you an example, if I want, if I have a tattoo on my right bicep saying super van, that's an identifier, that's personal information of me as Duane van der Merwe. Any demographic information, contact detail, financial information, and financial information is actually very, very sensitive information to a lot of people. You don't hear people going around announcing what their income is or their expenses every month. That's actually a very personal information to a lot of people, and a lot of schools do work with the financial information of parents, especially if they have to apply for the exemption of school fees. It's very important to take note that we do have the obligation to safeguard those personal information. Any background or historical information, we do sometimes work with the disciplinary record of a learner, looking at usernames or social media handles. We live in a digital era where persons actually create their identity through using technology. Preferences or opinions. And I've heard, please don't take offense by me saying so, but I've heard that the staff room is one place where people tend to have a lot of opinions about each other. So your opinion is also personal information, your behavior information, and then also correspondence. So if you're not sure if something is a personal information, just ask the question whether the information relating to an identifiable living natural person or an existing juristic person. So if the information can identify someone, it would be personal information. So then the Act goes one step further, and it gives us a definition of special personal information. Now, you can have a look at the list I have shared on my screen now, but of specific importance for me is the information of children. The personal information of children is regarded as special personal information. Now, what the POPIA Act does, it goes one step further, and as a rule of thumb, it's actually, or a point of departure, is that you shouldn't be processing these information unless you can justify it within the prescripts which is given by the POPIA Act. So that would either be if you have the permission of the parents, or you are processing it or within the framework of the law, or if you have a right that you do have to protect. So the POPIA Act prescribes specific conditions within which you may only process special personal information. Now, also, we have personal information in various formats. It's not now like the olden days anymore, where we have a piece of paper, and this paper is now the format within which we contain all of the personal information. I think the opposite is actually true. We've moved into a digital era where we now keep all of our data electronically. Also, if you have CCTV in your school, the recordings or the videos taken of the learners, any photographs or audio taken, that's also a format of personal information. And we're looking now at schools, and I see all of the schools nowadays have a Facebook or a Instagram where we actually share personal information. So the POPIA Act now requires us to take special measures. We may now not just release the information on these platforms without obtaining the permission of the parents before we do so. So please just take note. We now work with different formats within which we contain the information. Now, if we want to achieve information security, I've looked at the conditions as I've referred to earlier, which the POPIA Act prescribes. I've spotted that we actually now have a CIA triad. Which if we want to establish information security, we have to look at the availability, the integrity, and the confidentiality of the information. So to sum up the 8 conditions, these are the most important aspects that we have to start looking at when we process personal information. So just to kick off and to explain to you what I mean with each of these conditions that we do want to achieve. First of all, if we look at the availability, then we have to ensure that we have a continuity in our information management, which means that we want to protect our information against any sort of attacks, and we want to ensure that our systems are fault tolerant. So we want to make sure that in the storing of our information, for example, we want to make backups. So if a computer would crash, we would still be able to make that information available. Secondly, if we look at the integrity of the information, we want to ensure the integrity of the information. So we have to make sure that the information is not tampered with. So we now want to ensure that we put proper access control measures in place and look at our audit trails to see if we can identify any areas where we can improve on. And it's also important in the processing of our information, we have to look at the procedures. If we share information or if we transfer information, can we ensure the integrity of the information in those processes? And then finally, if we look at the confidentiality of the information, we want to ensure the confidentiality of the information, and to see if we can achieve the CIA triad plan. We have to look at our own planning. We have to look at the collection and the creation of the information, how we use the information, and if we keep the information on record or if we destroy the information, are we abiding by the prescripts that the POPIA Act sets for us? So today, unfortunately, we only have time to look at the plan that must be in place. Please be on the lookout for our next webinars. We will be looking at the other boxes, but I want to specifically look at how we go about to ensure that we plan for proper compliance with POPIA. So I have identified a 4-step plan. So first of all, it says risks in your school. FEDSAS did develop a checklist for you, so please make use of that checklist where you can look at physical security, your digital security, operational or administrative security within your school to identify where you have the greatest risk of an information breach which can compromise the confidentiality of your information. Secondly, the governance. When I refer to governance, I think it's important for you to identify your information governance model and just understand who is responsible for what. Take action. Once you've identified the risk, what actions are you going to take? And then finally, ensure sustainability. We don't want to fall back into old habits. We want to make sure that we sustain throughout to ensure information security. So it's important we have to know before we start doing. Now, just to go into a bit more detail, if we look at the risk assessment, there's a few important questions other than the checklist that you use, which FEDSAS has made available on our website. But it's important to ask the question, what personal information do we have? You can't protect what you can't spot. So it's important to ask the question, what personal information do you have? And secondly, what do we use it for, and do we really need the information? So the more information you have, the more measures you have to put in place. So it's really important to just collect and just to store the information that you do use and that you do need. Thirdly, the data subjects know what personal information we have and what we use it for. Now, I've referred to the term data subjects. It's the term that the POPIA Act uses. So the data subject is basically the person or the individual or the company, whoever it may be, whose personal information it is that the school has and what the school is going to process. So very important. Do your parents know what personal information you have of them and what you're using it for? We want to ensure transparency through the processing of the information to also ensure the integrity of the information. So that's an important question. Can we de-identify the information? What do I mean by that? Just to give you an example, let's say, for instance, your school want to change the clothing that the children wear. You can now send out a questionnaire and ask the parents to anonymously complete the forms, and now you have information which you have taken away the identity of the person, and you can now use the information that you have collected through your questionnaire. So see whether there are information that you can de-identify to ensure protection of that. Are we satisfied that the personal information is held securely? And I've asked Rian if he'd also share a few ideas with regards to the planning of digital information security. So Rian will also share a few ideas on that a bit later. And do only the people who need access have access? The reality is the more people you share access of the information with, the greater the risk is that there might be a breach. So please look into that. And then, is the personal information accurate and up to date? Do we delete or destroy personal information when it's no longer needed? And on this point, I do have to point out that please do remember that the delete button on your computer doesn't totally delete any information. Once you've deleted it, the information lies in your computer's recycle bin. So it's important to ensure, especially when you have a few people working with information, to make sure that they are up to date and that they receive the training on how to responsibly delete or destroy specific information. As your information officer, I'll expand on the information officer a bit later, and then we keep a record of the processing of the activities. Now that's step one. Our second step is to identify our information governance model. Now this is all of the people and how I see the information governance model of a school is that we have our principal on top. Now our principal is the equivalent of a CEO of a company, and the POPIA Act prescribes that the CEO or the equivalent thereof will be your entity's information officer. So very important that our principals do realize that they are the information officer as prescribed by POPIA. Now, I do know that our principals are already extremely busy. Now we want to go and request and expect of our principals to now marry this POPIA that we are requiring them to abide by. But luckily, the POPIA Act also makes provision for the appointment of deputy information officers. So if you know that your school wouldn't be able to on its own cope with the requirements and the insurance that the school abide by the prescripts of POPIA, it's important to consider and to identify who you would appoint as your school's deputy information officer. Now, usually that would be the guy who's a bit of a pain in the neck, or the lady who's a bit of a pain in the neck, who is very what's the word? In Afrikaans we'd say this is a agter mekaar persoon. He's a person who's very thorough in everything they do. That's the kind of person that you want to appoint as your deputy information officer. Then we have your school governing body, which is the equivalent to a company's board of directors. If we look at the POPIA Act, we see that that would be your responsible party. So your governing body is a responsible party to also see to it that there is compliance with the POPIA Act. And on this note, I think I just want to point out to you that please check the website as well. We have a document that prescribes to sets out what the role of the information officer is, and we're also planning on a webinar session to deal exactly with this topic as well. And then finally, we have the rest of our school. We have our educators, our non-educators, and our support. And one would be surprised, I think, if you do your risk analysis, you'd be surprised to see how much of the personal information is being processed by the bottom three components that I have shared here. If you look at your support, what I mean with that is that would be your school management team or your committees and so on. So it's very important to ensure and to make sure that the bottom component is also up to date on what the POPIA Act requires. And that's also what FEDSAS FEDSAS did identify as an area where we want to share and do some training on. So please also be on the lookout that we're going to do training for educators as well. And that is a free session. So please make sure to get all of your educators on board to also attend this session to make sure that they are aware that they know what is expected of them. Then we also have the Department of Education. I just wanted to indicate to you that outside of your school, there are also entities that sometimes process personal information of the data subjects of your school. The Department of Education would be, for instance, such an entity. And it's important to also indicate to your parents and inform your parents what data and specific data which the school is obliged and will be sharing with the Department of Education. And then finally, if we look at the outsourcing of information, I want to use the D6 app as an example. We also use D6, for instance, to share newsletter with parents. So the school now shares personal information with this third party. We outsource to them, and they are now also processing personal information of the school. So it's very important to, in this regard, ensure that you double check which third parties you are using, whether those third parties are able to comply with the prescripts of the POPIA Act, whether they have proper security measures in place. And then also finally, the school must conclude a proper agreement with this third party through which you require the third party to ensure the security of the information that you outsource to them. Now that's the second step. So let's get a bit practical. There are basically two approaches that you can follow and that you must follow to comply with POPIA. Now, the first is the risk-based approach. I've referred to the documents and I've referred to what you should be looking at. Now, I just want to point out on this point, it's not possible for you to cover every specific risk that the school may have with regards to breach of information. But it is important for you to identify what the biggest and the greatest risks in your school is, and then to ensure that you get the correct measures in place to limit that risk. And then we have a compliance-based approach. Now, this is the approach that you can attempt to become 100% paper compliant with. Now, this is the approach that FEDSAS can help you with. We have developed a POPIA compliant toolkit where we have already drafted all of the draft documents that you can use and that you can adapt for your school's own purposes. So please make sure that you do make use of those documents. So yeah, further to get a bit practical, we have to remember that we can look at data protection by design and by default. So design is actually quite easy. We've looked at it. We're planning for privacy, and we'd rather be proactive than reactive. We're not going to wait for a breach before we start implementing measures. We're going to be proactive. You might ask the question, Jana, yeah, okay, how do we protect data by default? Now that's actually, yeah, I can actually explain that quite easily. You have to start looking at minimal processing. The less information you collect, the easier it becomes to protect. Short storage. You don't want to keep information forever and ever and ever. It becomes a problem to store and to safeguard. So there's legal timelines within which you have to store information. Please check the POPIA policy on the website. We have included a list of those legal timelines. And if you've passed the timeline or the prescribed time, please make sure that you delete or you destroy the information that you no longer need. And transparency. You want to make sure that the data subject, the parents, are absolutely up to date on what you need the information for and what you are going to do with it. So yeah, a few quick wins. If we look at the compliance with POPIA, I've decided that a tortoise with a with a firecracker on his back would illustrate this quite good. Get your POPIA policy in place. That's a quick win if we look at compliance with POPIA. Appoint your information officers, and please be sure that they do know what is expected of them and that they do attend the FEDSAS training session. Make sure and look at your agreements with your product suppliers. Look at your policy, your interception of electronic communication or your data privacy policy. Make sure it is up to date. Look at the contracts of with your employees. You don't want an employee, once he or she resigns, to go out and about and share all of the personal information that they've learned within your school. Make sure that you include it in your contract, that they will ensure and see to it that they protect the confidentiality, and that you also inform your employees in your contract of what personal information you do expect of them and what you are going to do with that information. And then finally, our fourth step is our sustained compliance. Appointing a competent information officer. Now, I'm definitely not saying our school principals are not competent, but if we want sustained compliance, it is important to see to it that your information officer is dedicated in the work that he or she does. Auditing and monitoring processes. Make sure that you conduct those quite often to see if there are shortages which you do have to address. The protecting of personal information must be part of the employee's job description. It must become our way of work, business as usual. If we leave our computer, we want to ensure that every time we get up, your computer is password protected. A simple example. Make information governance a standing agenda item on your quarterly meetings. The SGB must make sure throughout the school year that they do look at the security measures, and they do reconsider and discuss the information governance. And then conduct regular training and awareness. Unfortunately, that's just the way we as humans are. We sometimes tend to fall into old habits. So please make sure to regularly train and to make aware all of the people that works quite closely with the personal information of the new security measures that is being implemented and the requirements in that regard. And then finally, do not panic. If you have any questions or if you're uncertain about anything, or you're not sure whether you are complying or you need practical advice on how to comply, please feel free to phone FEDSAS. Paul did share, or Paul will share the contact details of our provincial managers. So please make contact with FEDSAS. Visit the FEDSAS website where we have made a lot of information available. And don't feel that you are alone in this process. FEDSAS is also there with you. So just to share with you quickly, you'll see on our website, we have this POPIA link, which is on our home, on our landing page of our website. You can just click on that and it'll take you directly to our POPIA compliance toolkit. An important document which I do want to highlight is our practical guide to POPIA. That's basically your guide to all of the other documents that we have listed here. It will also take you through the process on how to go about to ensure that you are POPIA compliant. So yeah, on this note, I want to hand over to Rian. Rian will share with us some practical advice and some planning for digital information protection. Rian, so I'm going to hand over directly to you.
Thanks, Joanne. Well done. I think it's a wealth of information, and I hope everyone's brain's still running at full revs at this time of the day. I'm going to be very short in just guiding us through some elements on an introductory basis that we need to think about with electronic data. So all information is information, whether it be paper or electronic format. So if we talk electronic data, I just want to emphasize that it is not different information, it's just a different format. So if you have files with papers, you lock them up in a safe room. If you have electronic data, you have to apply the same sort of security measures to that. So what do we want to protect against? Protection against loss, so non-malicious loss of data. There's so many examples that I can think about, but if you lose data that you've been carrying around, you just put your computer somewhere in a coffee shop, you walked away without it, and somehow the computer is lost and there's a lot of data on there. Theft, which is the malicious way of gaining information by outside parties. So that's malicious, intentional stealing of information. And there's been a lot of stories in the news over the last year, 2-3 years about corporate institutions being targeted, the medical fraternity, the banking fraternity, various insurance companies have been targeted to gain personal information from the website. So a database costs a lot of money. If you've got a database of people, you can start targeting them with marketing and this kind of thing. So there's theft of information for either marketing and commercial purposes or even identity theft purposes, and some ransomware and malware purposes and that, or the device that gets stolen. So you leave your computer in the boot of your car. The next thing, they steal your car, they broke open the boot and they steal the computer. They actually want the device, but the device contains a lot of information, which is probably worth more than the device. And then the chances of corruption of data. So we've got to safeguard our data that we don't have to pull it, request it over and over again from the people whose information we have. So we've got to protect it, not just not share it, but protect it that we don't have to continuously request the same information. Protecting personal information must be part of, I think your name mentioned, it's got to be part of the service contract, your contract between employees and employers, but also part of your IT or ICT, the usage policy. How do we work with our IT systems and the information that goes into that? It's got to be part of that. And for the next year, we've got to focus on some of that. So let's just look at some information held by schools. And funnily enough, there's a great question in the Q&A box already, and we'll deal with it in the Q&A time about the SA SAMS data. Now, you are responsible for the data held at the school. And the types of data that you have is very personal, very sensitive. If you just look at the admissions application data, you've got parents' information, names, ID numbers, addresses, next of kin, telephone numbers, and everything around that. As far as learners go, you've got learners' personal information, which you and I earlier said is special personal information. So we've got personal information to protect, and then special personal information. So it's this POPIA is within the CIA. It seems like we really got to dance around this lady called POPIA that is making our lives difficult. But we've got to be very protective of special personal information, which include learner information. We've got pictures. Your name mentioned that, pictures and videos, and we take those at sports events. I see a lot of schools hosting videos of school events on their Facebook pages, their Instagram. We've got drones flying around and taking pictures and videos of people. We've got to be aware of the protection of the information. The school carries banking details. If your school has a debit order system or it makes use of debit orders, we've got information either electronically or in paper or both that carries banking details of parents. We've got marks, we've got attendance, we've got behavior, the code of conduct type information that's all stored in the administration system that we've got to be working with. And then financial information. And I want to stress this. This could be the type of information that you don't know. It's not banking details. It's not necessarily salary information, but it's payment behavior. Are they paying in advance? Are they in arrears? In the earlier session, the question came up, how does this scenario affect application for exemption, especially if it's treated by a third party? So there's a lot of information held by schools. But I want to give us a little bit of a frame of mind switch and just go back to where we are contextually in South Africa. I'm from Gauteng, commonly referred to as gangster's paradise, and I'm sure it covers a big portion of the country as well, that we are very security conscious in South Africa, or maybe just in Gauteng. So we don't think about not locking our homes and our cars. It's part of life. We have people driving around with dash cams or videos on your cell phone of incidents to protect ourselves. So we take pictures that's international or videos, international and local behavior. So we have already moved our minds into being very security conscious. What we've got to do now is just marry that security consciousness with electronic data that we store. So we don't have to teach people in South Africa to be security conscious. We just got to put in that security consciousness frame the fact that data is also very valuable and needs to be protected. We are used to having alarms. We're used to having armed responses. We do pay insurance. And sometimes insurance is a grudge payment. It's a grudge cost expenditure. You don't want to pay insurance, but you can't afford to not pay it because if something goes wrong. Same with security, data security and protection of information. We've got to put our minds there that it's not a sexy payment. It's not nice. It doesn't add a lot of value. But once you need it, you could be in big trouble. And I think you and I will mention non-compliance penalties in future webinars as we go along. It is very onerous if you're non-compliant. So let's look at control procedures that we can apply. And this is very, very high level and rapid fire. If you look at an environment, you've got to look at physical controls. We lock our doors. We don't let people visiting the school office behind the counter. We keep them in front of the counter. We don't turn our computer screen towards the front. We keep it towards the back. There's physical controls. There's barriers to entry. There's a button that opens the door, and that's more a security thing, but that also protects the environment that we work in. Electronic environment controls is how do we secure our network? Do we have a firewall? Do we have security features on our network to show that we might have breaches or not? The whole control environment around our electronic usage, cell phones on the network, personal computers on the network, work computers on the network, school computers on the network. The next level or additional level that we need to look to is application controls. That would be the physical software app that we're using. For finances, we use Pastel or Sage or ACPAC or something like that. There's an application control in there that means the system doesn't just open up. There's a username and password to get into the system. There's a backup procedure. There's encryption of storing the data, and there's application controls. We would want to see one user have his or her own username and password and not share passwords. We would want to see transaction logs, user logs, change logs, so that we have an audit trail of who tried to download all the customer information. What time, what PC. So there's application controls there that need to be in place. And then there would be user controls. Similar to what we said about the username and password is, we tell people, don't share your username and password. Don't share your PIN and give someone your credit card. We don't do that. It's automatic. But yet we are very comfortable in saying, here's my username, here's my password, go use my profile to log into to the system. Carrying around your laptop outdoors, going to the shop, walking around with it, keeping it in your car where it's visible, that's a bad user control. So yeah, I think I want to end there and just say that the FEDSAS Center for Technology has been punting the philosophy, the thinking. It's not a statutory position, but we're saying so many things are moving towards the technological information space that businesses, like we had the CEO only 20 years ago, and then later on the CFO, and now the COO, and all these chief officers. Recently, the CIO has become one of the most important positions in business, because so much information is being gained, generated, and stored in the digital world that a lot of businesses have employed the chief information officer. So in the Center for Technology, from the beginning of the year, we've actually been saying, we think it's a good idea, not a statutory idea, but it's a good idea to position someone in the SGB, either on the SMT or a member of the SGB, to wear the thinking cap of the chief information officer. We've got to work with a lot of information, and information is not just electronic, but all electronic information is information. So everything that we generate on an electronic platform suddenly becomes information that we need to use. And then finally, we just got to say that technology is such a big component in the information management space that we've got to include our technological space in our POPIA framework. So how we manage POPIA has got to be an overarching thing. And the first question in the Q&A was about the SASAM space. And just to add on to UNA's do not panic, I got a little bit cutesy and said, don't panic, but planic. Let's plan. We've got 12 months to sort out POPIA at a school and call FEDSAS. So you're welcome to give us a shot. I'm going to hand over to Paul, and he's going to take over the Q&A. I think we're going to start off with that SASAM's question. Paul, shall I go ahead with it?
Oh, thanks. Just before you go there, just a quick reminder of, let me just make sure we're sharing the right page here. Let's just see, just a quick reminder, I've dropped in your box, in the question, in the chat box, a link to our practical guide. So if you wouldn't mind just having a look at that and picking up those details. And then, yeah, there's a question that's come through, and there's been a follow-up on that as well. And I think, Rian, yeah, you've been dealing with the SASAM's process quite a lot. I don't want to exclude Jeanne from adding in her input into the process, but yeah, take us through that question. You can all see it, KZN. We have to send SASAMs to the department on a CD. It's a compact disc for those that don't know what it is. And there's a concern as to where this goes. And then right after that, someone said they had a call from a call center trying to sell them a policy. They had their ID number and the personnel number. What can one do? I think the two might be linked. They might not be. But Rian, what do we do about that?
Yeah, this is a difficult question because Joanne alluded to the fact that the school has data. So SASAMS is a tool the Department of Education gives you, but by using the tool doesn't make the data that the parent gives the school irrelevant to the school being the owner of the data, the relevant party, as well as the responsible party, and the information officer at the school being responsible for that data. If Joanne can just nod her head and agree with my thinking there, because it was given over the counter to the school. So the school is responsible for managing that data. If you hand it to a third party, even it be the Department of Education, you either have to sign over the responsibility to them and make sure. But if you have, within reasonable limits, not certainty that that data is carried on securely, data on a flash drive, data on a hard drive, and data on a CD is not necessarily very secure. SASAMS has a non-encrypted database. It's been hacked very easily. It's an old technology, Visual Basic VB8 front end with Microsoft Access back end. So it's not very secure. And to put it on a CD, you're handing all of that information to someone. So I think the jury is not out yet on that one, but I think it's difficult. And the Department of Education must tell us how they're going to protect that information so that the school doesn't carry the responsibility. In my mind, I'm more of the opinion that we are the owners as schools of the information, and the means and ways to upload that information to the Department of Education should not be done in a manual or CD or flash drive way, but on a secure link via the internet or a direct link, so that the data doesn't touch hands, but that it just carries forward. And then you've transferred the data. Then the data warehouse of the department, the provincial data warehouse, will be responsible for the security and protection of that. I don't know if you want to add to that, but for me, that is a problematic thing. If CDs, boxes full of CDs with school information lying around in district offices, I'm uncomfortable with that, and we've got to put that question to the Department of Education, how they feel about that. Maybe if I can just jump on the second one.
Rian,
yeah.
Rian, sorry, if I can just come in quickly. I absolutely concur with what you've just said. I think I also just want to emphasize that in terms of POPI, if the operator, the department would be regarded as the operator. Now, if the operator takes part in determining the purpose and the means of the processing of the personal information, they also become a responsible party. So it's like a shared responsibility between the school and the department to ensure the security and the compliance with POPI. And absolutely, as you have indicated, it's important to identify those risks with regards to how do you upload the information onto SAMS. I mean, from FEDSAS' side, we will be going into the discussions with the department as to measures that they would be putting in place to ensure information security. But I just wanted to point out that together with the school, the department would also be a responsible party.
Excellent. So we're in agreement with that. That we share information with the department is not the debate. How we now share it is the debate. Because Section 59 requires us to share that information with the department as prescribed. But how we share it, we don't just publish it on the website and say, go take it off there. So it's protection of the personal information, the responsibility side. Yes, I can only comment on the phone call with the person that had the ID number and personal number at hand. I just want to say that I find that in my case as well, sometimes people call me with my ID number and my phone number, and I don't know where they got it. So that just shows the risk of it, of all places where you put in your data. So yeah, whoever leaked their data is not compliant.
Yeah.
Rian, if I can quickly come in on the last question, I think when we all heard POPIA has now been is now effective, we all thought, yay, the day of telemarketers and direct marketing is a thing of the past. But I think one thing that was missed is the Consumer Protection Act, which still allows direct marketing, and that has not been repealed. So the advice that I can give, if you are called by a direct marketer, is to indicate to that person that you are now opting out and that they must remove your information from their list. That's the best way to for now, in light of the Consumer Protection Act, to deal with that. Just to add on to that question.
Yeah, Jona, I'm going to drop the last question on your lap as well. I think we've got a document with that. I think you actually produced it. Should parents give written permission for children to be featured in school magazines, Facebook, or local newspaper articles, or that sort of publication? I think we've got a consent form on the FEDSAS page, but just enlighten us.
Yeah, definitely, Rian. That would also form part of the processing of the information. So we have drafted a document which the parents now have to give specific permission to, if you want to publish the photo on Facebook or in a magazine. It must be purpose specific, the permission that is given. So It might require a lot of additional administrative work for the schools, and I think in that regard it's important to see how you can practically go about to manage that best. But that's definitely now the implications of the POPIA Act before you can publish and post.
Some schools that have...
Can I just come in just to get clarity? Because I think in the past schools have been doing it the other way around, and they've been getting a sort of blanket thing, unless you tell us we're going to use your pictures. That's sort of been part of the admission process or the application forms that say the school is entitled to use it unless you let us know. And I think that's the big change. If you can just clarify, am I right in saying that? The big change is now you need written permission to use it. You don't need a sort of blanket letter that says you can use it if you choose to.
Yeah, definitely, Paul. If you look at the consent, I didn't include that slide in this presentation, but as you've said, it now must be purpose specific. You cannot just give a blank permission for the school to use information as they like or as they want. It now has to be, as I've said, purpose specific. You have to indicate what you are going to do with it. So, yeah.
Yeah, maybe just as a practical one, I've seen what a few schools do is they take the permission or the non-permission from parents. They take pictures of those learners and put it up in the social media management office, and whoever posts anything on social media checks if any of the pictures have some of those individuals whose pictures are on there. So you've got to manage it. If a parent said, no, you're not going to use my child's picture, you must not post a picture of that, including a child. So that's a very practical, difficult one. But yeah, I think that's it from our side, Paul.
Sorry, there is one question which you're going to love. I think you might have missed it. How secure is Google Classroom?
I missed that. I did miss that. How secure is Google Classroom? Google Classroom is very secure, but in the Google space. So it's a two-edged sword. How secure is Google? Because Google's main drive, and we all agree to the terms when we use it, is that they get all the information that we share. So Google and Facebook, even WhatsApp, has the information that you post and traffic on their sites. So if you Google something today, a ski holiday in Austria, tomorrow when you open Facebook, Facebook will advertise a skiing holiday in Austria for you. It's like, how did they know? So to say Google Classroom is safe, yes, it is safe as a closed loop environment. But Google has one of their main tasks is to gain data, not necessarily personal, individual information, although it's that granular, but they don't go sell it, they use it. So if you use anything that's for free, they gain a lot of information from you. So if we say, if a platform is free, you are the product. So you accept the terms and conditions and you tell them what you search in Google. They know what you search, and sometimes they suggest search results for you because they build with artificial intelligence. They build a profile of your user in Google. So yes, it is secure. No one else can hack it, but they know everything about it. Inside the house, they know everything, but people from outside. So I think it's a secure environment for schools, but Google knows what they know, if that answers the question.
No, that's great. There was another question that just came in, and I think it's really relevant. That's why I'm going to use the time. With regard to the POPIA policy, is it a requirement to have it in 3 official languages? Jeanne?
Thanks, Paul. No, the same requirements as is with the PIA manual. The PIA manual that schools do have or do need to have, you have the requirements to make it available in 3 official languages. But luckily, there's no prescript for your POPIA policy. So it's just you have to make it available in your preferred language, which I believe most schools would probably be English.
Okay. So yeah, your language of learning and teaching, I suppose that's what one looks at from there. Excellent. Thanks very much, folks, for the questions that have come through. I'm just going to finish off quickly by letting you know about our series of webinars that are coming up ahead. I have dropped a link into the chat box as well that you can pick it up. So I'm not going to go through them all individually, but we are looking at the very important aspects of financial management, the budget processes. We're looking at emotional support. Obviously, and by now, those that we're presenting might not have heard, President Ramaphosa is speaking to us at 8 o'clock tonight, and there may well be some changes in the schedule that we have got in front of us, but these are the topics that we're going to be looking to present in any case going forward between now and let's say August. Maybe it will be pushed out to September, depending exactly what happens in the school environment and what news we're going to get from there. We're going to be looking at the appointment processes. We have got a session directed at the educators with regards to POPIA Act as well, and that's quite important as well. I think educators in general must understand that it's not up to the principal and the governing body to manage information. It needs to go further down as well. And then we are starting to look at SGB elections in 2021 and how we're going to handle succession planning and processes going forward from there. As Jeanne mentioned, there's our provincial managers. Please get hold of them if you need information. They are the go-to people in the various provinces. Not only do they understand things on a national level, but they also understand the nuances, and I'll say that very carefully because every province has got its nuances that creep into the provinces. So please get hold of those provincial managers, and their contact details are there. The website details, we've spoken a little bit about that. So I think all that leaves me to do is just to hand over. And because I asked Rian to close off earlier in the Afrikaans session, I'll ask Jeanne just to close off us today. Thank you very much, Ita, for the information. I think it's a valuable path. 12 months goes by very quickly, folks. Our CEO asked me offline how many people attended. He was a bit concerned that there's so few. And I think we're thinking that 12 months is a long way away. Folks, 12 months goes very quickly, and we don't want to be caught unprepared in the process. Jeanne, over to you for the last word. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Paul. And if I can be as cutish as Rian, from this poppy, good luck with the other poppy, and have a great afternoon. Thanks for tuning in. See you again. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, everybody. Cheerio.